Hello, this is Chuck Stevens, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the February 18th issue of the New York Times here on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Our first story, Jesse Jackson, charismatic champion of civil rights, dies at the age of 84. The Reverend Jesse Jackson, whose impassioned oratory and populist vision of a rainbow coalition of the poor and forgotten made him the nation's most influential black figure in the years between the civil rights crusades of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the election of Barack Obama, died on Tuesday at his home in Chicago at the age of 84. His death was confirmed by his family in a statement which said that Mr. Jackson died peacefully but did not give a cause of death. Mr. Jackson was hospitalized in November for treatment of a rare and particularly severe neurodegenerative condition called progressive supranuclear palsy, or PSP, according to the advocacy organization he founded, the Rainbow Push Coalition. In 2017, he announced that he had Parkinson's disease, which in its early stages can produce similar effects on bodily movements and speech. Mr. Jackson picked up the mantle of Dr. King after his assassination in 1968 and ran for president twice, long before Mr. Obama's election in 2008. But he never achieved either the commanding moral stature of Dr. King or the ultimate political triumph obtained by President Obama. Instead, through the power of his language, energy, and ambition, he became a moral and political force in a racially ambiguous era, when Jim Crow was still a vivid memory and black political power more an aspiration than a reality. With his gospel of seeking common ground, his pleas to keep hope alive, and his demands for respect for those seldom accorded it, Mr. Jackson, particularly in his galvanizing speeches at the Democratic conventions in 1984 and 1988, enunciated a progressive vision that defined the soul of the Democratic Party, if not necessarily its policies, in the last decades of the 20th century. It was a vision animated by the civil rights era, in which an inclusive coalition of people of color and others who had been at the periphery of American life would now move to the forefront and transform it. My constituency is the desperate, the damned, the disinherited, the disrespected, and the despised, Mr. Jackson said in the rolling cadences of the pulpit at the 1984 Democratic National Convention in San Francisco. They are restless and seek relief. His transcendent rhetoric was inseparable from an imperfect human being whose ego, instinct for self-promotion, and personal failings were a source of unending irritation to many friends and admirers, and targets for derision by many critics. Mr. Jackson, the writer and social commentator Stanley Crouch once said, will be forever doomed by his determination to mythologize his life. Still, he offered an expansive vision of American opportunity that admirers say helped change the nation's landscape of possibility. And his idea of a multiracial coalition empowered by an activist government to confront rampant inequality in American life remains central to the progressive wing of the Democratic Party and has inspired groups like Black Lives Matter. Nothing about Mr. Jackson was simple, starting with his upbringing. He was born Jesse Louis Burns on October 8, 1941 in Greenville, South Carolina. His mother, Helen Burns, was 16 at the time, a high school majorette renowned in town for her great soprano singing voice. His father, Noah Lewis Robinson, was a handsome, imposing 33-year-old former boxer who lived next door, married to another woman. That he was not involved in his son's rearing was a source of humiliation for Jesse, as he grew up in his small, segregated black community. In 1943, his mother married Charles Jackson, whom she had met while he was a shoeshine attendant at a barbershop before he joined the Army. Mr. Jackson did not adopt Jesse until 14 years later. When the couple had a son of their own, Jesse was sent to live with his maternal grandmother in a shotgun shack around the corner. Rejected by his father and not fully embraced by his stepfather, he was taunted by other children, all while learning the racial caste system of the segregated South. Years later, he recalled the 2 water fountains at Clausen's Bakery where he worked on Saturday mornings, and the first time his mother led him to the back of the bus. At the same time, he stood out for his energy, intelligence, and athleticism. He was an uncommonly nervy little fellow, never abashed at all. Vivian Taylor, a high school English teacher in Greenville, told Marshall Frady for his sprawling 1996 biography, Jesse, The Life and Pilgrimage of Jesse Jackson. She added he thought a whole lot of himself right off the bat. As another friend, Leroy Griggs, told Mr. Frady, he could talk a hole through a billy goat. After graduating from high school in 1959, Mr. Jackson enrolled at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign on a football scholarship, an opportunity that allowed him to escape Jim Crow for the first time. He soon experienced what he later described wryly as the legendary liberalism of the North. He had never been called the most hurtful racial slur in the South, he said, but he was taunted with it by college students in the North. It was the same thing as South Carolina, he said, just way off somewhere else. His bravado shaken, he transferred after his freshman year to what is now North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University, a historically black institution in Greensboro. There he found the familiar cadences of Southern life. Friends recalled the gospel music of Mahalia Jackson pouring out of his room. He became a leader in his fraternity and eventually president of the student body. And he fell in love with a vibrant, high-energy student named Jacqueline Lavinia Brown, known as Jackie. They married on New Year's Eve in 1962. Soon their first child was born, a daughter they named Sanita. 4 more children followed over the next 12 years. Mr. Jackson went home to something else as well, the early stirrings of the civil rights movement. The winter before he arrived in February of 1960, 4 students from the Agricultural College had sat down at the segregated lunch counter of the Woolworth store in downtown Greensboro. For a time, Mr. Jackson resisted being drawn into the protests. When he did join, he became a leader. In June 1963, he led a march that drew hundreds of students downtown and was arrested the next day, turning the occasion into something of a political coming-out party. In what seems, in retrospect, both a homage to Dr. King and a gesture of either characteristic ambition or characteristic egotism, while in jail for a day, Mr. Jackson sketched out a 1-page letter from a Greensboro jail, modeled after Dr. King's famous letter from a Birmingham jail, which had been published a month earlier. It's not clear if Mr. Jackson ever finished the letter, and it does not appear that it was ever published. As an undergraduate, Mr. Jackson considered becoming a lawyer, but decided to enter the ministry instead. After graduating from college in 1964, he enrolled at the Chicago Theological Seminary. It was an impossible time for someone with Mr. Jackson's passions to be lost in scholarly contemplation. Stunned by the beatings of black demonstrators in Selma, Alabama, in March of 1965, he climbed atop a table in the seminary's cafeteria and challenged other students to join him on a trip there. About 20 students and a third of the faculty took him up on the call, and they all headed south. There, Mr. Jackson offered his services to members of Dr. King's Inner Circle in Southern Christian Leadership Conference, irking a few of them by acting as if he were in a position of authority. He met Dr. King and went home transformed. So on to Chicago. 6 months after Selma, while still pursuing his studies, Mr. Jackson became, at the age of 24, the youngest SCLC staff member. He was chosen to head the Chicago chapter of the SCLC's Operation Breadbasket, a national economic development campaign whose goal was to use boycotts as a way to pressure white businesses to hire black workers and to purchase goods and services from black contractors. By 1967, he was gaining a national reputation as he promoted the program. 6 months before graduating, he quit his seminary studies to plunge into the civil rights movement full-time. He was later ordained by the minister of a Chicago church after he went to work for Dr. King. Dr. King became an intellectual and a spiritual model for Mr. Jackson, as well as a father figure. Jesse said the Reverend Ralph David Abernathy, perhaps Dr. King's closest associate, wanted to be Martin. For all his zeal, Mr. Jackson became the most controversial member of Dr. King's inner circle. Though he was part of the leadership, he was also, with his base in Chicago, almost an independent actor. His ego, charisma, and ability to generate press for himself left others in the SCLC suspicious of his ambitions and led to clashes even with Dr. King. It all came to a climax in April of 1968 when Dr. King went to Memphis to show support for striking garbage workers. Dr. King was outside his second-floor room at the Lorraine Motel bantering with SCLC colleagues in the parking lot below before going out to dinner when a single rifle shot shattered that moment. What happened next shadowed the way Mr. Jackson was viewed for decades. He was one of several aides who rushed toward Dr. King after he was shot. Later that night, Mr. Jackson hurried back to Chicago, parts of which were in flames in the unrest that followed the assassination. The next morning, he appeared on the Today Show wearing the olive turtleneck sweater blotted with blood that he had worn the day before in Memphis. At a memorial convocation of the Chicago City Council that day, he declared, "I come here with a heavy heart because on my chest is the stain of blood from Dr. King's head." He added, "He went through literally a crucifixion. I was there, and I'll be there for the resurrection." At least once publicly, he indicated that he was the last person to speak with Dr. King, and that he held his bloodied head as Dr. King lay dying. Others who were there said it never happened. Mr. Jackson's account changed over time, from cradling Dr. King's head to reaching toward it. If Mr. Jackson had been a figure of suspicion before, he became an object of outrage after Dr. King's death. Some in Dr. King's inner circle, including his eventual successor, Mr. Abernathy, and Hosea Williams, both of whom rushed to Dr. King when he was shot, questioned the accuracy of Mr. Jackson's account and resented what they saw as a calculated grab to seize the spotlight as the first mourner. Their misgivings were not misplaced. Don Rose, a political consultant who worked with Mr. Jackson, said in a recent interview that almost immediately after returning to Chicago, Mr. Jackson was making the case that his youth and energy made him the logical person to inject new life into the movement rather than the somewhat stodgy older members of Dr. King's inner circle. Other observers said that some of those who were most critical of Mr. Jackson had made their own place for attention, and that so many conflicting accounts emerged from the chaos following the shooting that it was hard to be certain precisely what role anyone had played. Even some of those most incensed at the time tried to make their peace with it. "I hope God has forgiven him," Mr. Abernathy told the New York Times in 1987, as Mr. Jackson was preparing for a second presidential run. "He's had the time to pray. He's a different man now." Mr. Jackson largely avoided discussing what he called the slanders directed at him, but he indicated that they reflected a misunderstanding of his actions and words, as well as the rifts in the SCLC that preceded Memphis. Still, if Mr. Jackson's perceived attempt to seize Dr. King's mantle struck some as unseemly, it presaged in a large part what was to come. If no one could replace Dr. King, Mr. Jackson was the one who spent most of his life trying. After Dr. King's death, Mr. Jackson repeatedly clashed with Mr. Abernathy, the new head of the SCLC. In late 1971, their relationship fell apart entirely after Mr. Abernathy suspended Mr. Jackson for 60 days for administrative improprieties and repeated acts a violation of organizational policy. Politics beckoned. Freed from the institutional hierarchy of the SCLC, Mr. Jackson became a ubiquitous presence in American life, promoting social justice causes almost nonstop across the United States and overseas, in South Africa, Haiti, the Middle East, and elsewhere. Before long, his focus had shifted almost inevitably to a new area, politics. As early as 1971, he flirted with the idea of starting a new political party. In 1980, he became a tireless campaigner for President Jimmy Carter in his unsuccessful re-election bid. It set the stage for his becoming invaluable to the Democratic Party for his success in registering black voters. In 1984, Mr. Jackson decided it was time to campaign for himself as the second black candidate from a major party to run for president after Shirley Chisholm, the former congresswoman from Brooklyn, in 1972. He established the National Rainbow Coalition as a vehicle for a populist campaign. That campaign illustrated the potential of an insurgent black politician and the landmines strewn in front of him. His informal globe-trotting diplomacy, particularly his prominent role in 1984 in securing the release of a Navy lieutenant, Robert O. Goodman, Jr., who was imprisoned in Lebanon after his plane was shot down, made him at once a political force and an international figure who transcended politics. So potent was his voice that his ardent promotion of the term African American to honor the origins of the descendants of an enslaved people influenced the nation's very vernacular of the time. 3 weeks after launching his presidential campaign, in informal conversations with black reporters, he used the offensive terms Jaime and Jaimetown to describe the Jewish population in New York City. The words, reported 37 paragraphs deep in an analytical article in the Washington Post, set off a furor that would hang over him for years. And his initial reluctance to distance himself from Louis Farrakhan, the Nation of Islam leader who had made anti-Semitic remarks himself, only added to his problems, although he stated in 1984 that criticism Mr. Farrakhan had made of Israel was reprehensible. Still, fueled by black voters, particularly in the South, whom he had helped register in historic numbers, Mr. Jackson stunned many political observers with the strength he showed in the 1984 race for the Democratic presidential nomination, emerging as the first black candidate to become a serious contender in a national contest. Mr. Jackson picked up 3.2 million votes in primaries, third behind Senator Gary Hart of Colorado, and former Vice President Walter E. Mondale, the eventual nominee. And his dramatic 50-minute speech to the convention at the Moscone Center in San Francisco was perhaps the emotional high point of the doomed Democratic campaign against the popular incumbent Ronald Reagan. He tried again in 1988, and this time he began as a party heavyweight. In the Super Tuesday primary on March 8th, he ran first or second in 16 of the 21 primaries and caucuses. Party leaders, fearing they could not win a general election with an assertively left-wing black presidential candidate, desperately looked for an alternative. In the end, Governor Michael S. Dukakis of Massachusetts won the nomination, even though Mr. Jackson had earned almost 7 million primary votes, 29% of the total. The party's convention in Atlanta was bittersweet. Mr. Jackson campaigned hard for the vice presidential nomination and was disappointed not to be picked. But again, a televised speech he delivered electrified the convention. This time weaving his own story of overcoming poverty and abandonment with the aspirations of those represented by his Rainbow Coalition, coming back again and again to the search for common ground, he spoke as if personally to all those at the forgotten corners of American life. Call you outcast, low down, you can't make it, you're nothing. You're from nobody, subclass, underclass, he said. When you see Jesse Jackson, when my name goes in nomination, your name goes in nomination. I was born in the slum, but the slum was not born in me, and it wasn't born in you, and you can make it. The speech, which he concluded by 4 times shouting out, "Keep hope alive," was immediately hailed as an American political classic. Mr. Jackson found himself unsure about where to go from there. At times, he considered running for the Senate from South Carolina or for mayor of Washington, but he decided against another political campaign, giving fuel to those who saw his failure to hold public office as a mark against him. Jesse don't want to run nothing but his mouth, Mayor Marion S. Barry Jr. of Washington was quoted as saying in the Los Angeles Times in 1990. Mr. Jackson won his first election later that year, when he captured one of 2 special unpaid statehood senator posts created by the Washington City Council to lobby Congress for statehood for the District of Columbia. The position brought no ability to enact legislation or shape policy. To some, he was trying to play by the old rules of moral suasion and extra-governmental activism when power was increasingly shifting to black politicians like Mayor Harold Washington of Chicago, and later a young United States Senator, also from Illinois, named Barack Obama. Over Mr. Jackson's last decades, it was Representative John Lewis, wielding power from the more traditional political platform of the Georgia congressional seat that he held for 17 terms, who was widely viewed as the most admired living veteran of the civil rights era. Mr. Jackson decided against a 3rd presidential run in 1992 when Democrats took back the White House behind Bill Clinton. Mr. Clinton made him a special envoy to Africa and in 2000 awarded him the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian honor. As the Democratic Party struggled to adjust to a nation moving to the right, Mr. Jackson became a voice of the marginalized American left, pushing back at the prevailing political winds and speaking out for anti-war and social justice causes. He also faced personal controversies and crises. In 2001, it was revealed that he had fathered a child, Ashley Jackson, in 1999 with a woman who had worked for his advocacy group, now called, after a merger, the Rainbow Push Coalition. During Mr. Obama's presidential run in 2008, Mr. Jackson had to apologize and was rebuked by his own son, Representative Jesse Jackson Jr., for derisive remarks he had made about Mr. Obama that were picked up by an open microphone. If Jesse Jackson Jr. had become part of his father's legacy, he was also a source of dismay when the son resigned from Congress in 2012 and was sentenced to 30 months in prison for spending $750,000 from his campaign on personal items. Mr. Jackson requested that President Joseph R. Biden Jr. pardon Jesse Jr. in 2024 in an appeal that mentioned Mr. Biden's pardon of his own son Hunter. The request was denied. In October, Jesse Jackson Jr. announced that he would seek to regain his seat representing Illinois' 2nd Congressional District in this year's midterm election. In addition to his son Jesse Jr., Mr. Jackson's survivors include his wife, his other children, Sanita, Jonathan, Yusuf, Jacqueline, and Ashley, and a number of grandchildren. The elder Mr. Jackson continued his political work, including efforts to promote black economic inclusion in Silicon Valley and on Wall Street. Though some companies objected to what they viewed as a pressure tactic by his organizations in raising money, the companies complained that the groups would first publicly criticize them over their records on minority contracting or serving low-income consumers, and then turned around and accept grants from those same companies, some of which contracted with minority concerns run by Mr. Jackson's friends. Mr. Jackson said his organizations had done nothing improper. The same people that you challenge one day, once they come around and honor the law, then we build relationships with them, he told the New York Times in 2001. Of course, that's what we do. It is legal, appropriate, and effective. In later years, groups like Black Lives Matter brought new faces and energy to causes that Mr. Jackson had once championed, and the presidency of Donald J. Trump presented an unwelcome counterweight to his life's work. Mr. Jackson was 76 when he announced in November of 2017 that he had been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease and that he would be taking time to focus on his health. His diagnosis of progressive supranuclear palsy, which shares some symptoms with Parkinson's, was announced in April of last year. But he remained active, and as recently as August of 2021, at the age of 79, he was among the activists arrested in Washington while protesting voting restrictions that were being pushed by Republicans nationwide. He officially retired from his role leading the Rainbow Push Coalition in 2023, but he continued to participate in rallies and public events. In 2025, he joined a boycott of Target after the company rolled back its DEI program. The year before, he went to Racine, Wisconsin, to encourage young people to vote in the presidential election. To some, Mr. Jackson's unrealized aspirations reflected his own limitations as a charismatic public figure, whose instinct for improvisational, media-focused politics left him with no appealing final act. And for all his rhetorical thunder, the Democrats never fully embraced the vision of an unshamedly liberal party based not on the white middle class, but rather on his coalition of poor and working-class people of all colors. Claiborne Carson, a history professor at Stanford University and director of the Martin Luther King Jr. Research and Education Institute, said Mr. Jackson had suffered in large part from being caught between two eras. Too late to be the unambiguously heroic figure like Dr. King, too early to succeed at the highest levels in politics like Mr. Obama. But Mr. Jackson had played a critical role, Professor Carson said, in translating the voting rights gains of the 1960s into a political reality that made possible a black president far sooner than many would have expected. Jesse Jackson played a central role in his era as king, did his era, he said in an interview for this obituary in 2012. But it was not the kind of heroic struggle as in the 1960s. You're not going to get a Nobel Prize for what Jesse Jackson did, but it took a lot of talent, initiative, energy, imagination, and charisma, and he had those in full supply. Similarly, Mr. Rose, the Chicago political consultant who also worked with Jesse Jackson Jr., said that the successes of the father, more than his failings, were what undid him. In helping to kick down racial barriers to electoral success without winning office himself, he was left with limited political options. He was kind of a victim of his own success, Mr. Rose said in an interview. He was really a moral leader rather than elected leader, but we now look to elected leaders to address our problems. A picket line is not going to change the voter laws in Florida. Mr. Jackson, too, described himself as more a moral leader than a political one. My mission has been to transform the mind of America, he told a convention of black lawyers in Washington in 1988. It's not just politics, small p, as in delegates and votes, but politics, big P, as in transforming our minds and changing our self-concept. If Mr. Jackson never realized his grandest dreams, Professor Carson said, he was not alone in falling short. In his best imagination, he said, he saw himself as someone who could bring the country together, appeal to working-class whites as well as poor blacks, unite them around economic change. But that's been a dream in American politics for as long as there has been American politics. When that dream has to confront reality, it's a hard bridge to cross. Still, if Mr. Jackson's political journey remained painfully unfinished, his aspirations and frustrations are as relevant to American politics now as they were during his Keep Hope Alive speech to the Democratic National Convention in 1988. At one point in that speech, he told a story about his grandmother in Greenville. She could not afford a blanket, he said, but she did not complain, and the family did not freeze. Instead, she took pieces of old cloth, patches of wool, silk, gabardine, crocker sack, only patches barely good enough to wipe off your shoes with, and she sewed them together into a quilt. A thing of beauty and power and culture. He implored Democrats to build such a quilt. Be as wise as my grandma, he said. Pull the patches and the pieces together, bound by a common thread. When we form a great quilt of unity and common ground, we'll have the power to bring about health care and housing and jobs and education and hope to our nation. We, the people, can win. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Don't forget our programming all available on all major podcast platforms, and you can listen live at our website, nfradioreading.org. From the front page, as Bernie Sanders comes to California, wealth tax opponents intensify efforts. The opponents' latest moves include online ads tied to Governor Gavin Newsom, a crypto-related push to raise money, and competing ballot measures. On one side, Senator Bernie Sanders is firing up California voters and encourage them to tax billionaires as a matter of fairness. On the other side, Governor Gavin Newsom, crypto executives, and business leaders are ramping up efforts this week to stop the proposed wealth tax, warning that the measure would stifle innovation. The fight is escalating in California this week as Mr. Sanders brings his populist message to a Los Angeles rally on Wednesday, while opponents are deploying ads, raising money, and pursuing competing ballot measures to prevent the wealth tax from becoming law. A healthcare workers union has only until April to collect nearly 900,000 valid signatures to place the tax measure on the November ballot. Union leaders believe the visit by Mr. Sanders will energize their campaign, which has already trained more than 1,000 volunteers and doubled the amount per signature that it is paying petition circulators. Here is a look at how the battle lines are shaping up so far and the emerging opposition strategy. A populist anti-Trump message. The wealth tax was initiated by Service Employees International Union United Healthcare Workers West, which largely represents employees at private hospitals, including cooks and janitors. The organization has built a reputation in recent years for its aggressive use of ballot measures to pressure healthcare employers. The unions argue that a one-time 5% tax on people with more than $1 billion would support critical healthcare programs that were slashed by President Trump. The measure would raise tens of billions of dollars over the next few years, though it could also result in lower revenues over the long term if billionaires flee the state, according to state fiscal analysts. Backers are hoping that a California electorate frustrated by the state's high living costs and the accumulation of Silicon Valley wealth will support the measure. Mr. Sanders, a Vermont independent, is a major asset for the union. He won the 2020 Democratic presidential primary in California with more than a third of the vote and has a strong populist appeal in the state. His visit comes ahead of a California Democratic Party convention in San Francisco this weekend, where the union hopes to further build momentum for its measure. I think it's time to say to the billionaire class, hey, you know what? You can't have it all, Mr. Sanders said in a call with reporters last week. Mr. Newsom, a Democrat, has a close relationship with Silicon Valley and has long raised concerns about scaring off tech leaders, given that California already has the nation's highest taxes on high earners. He is also considering a presidential run in 2028, and a wealth tax could be a vulnerability as he tries to appeal to voters beyond California, especially in a general election. He has tried to move the issue away from his state by saying a wealth tax should only be explored at the national level. A group tied to Mr. Newsom is kicking off its opposition drive this week by targeting social media ads at Democratic activists and other party insiders. Some of the ads will feature Mr. Newsom, who has said the tax would harm innovation in the state and drive away wealthy residents whose income taxes pay for education and health care. The ads will also feature several candidates seeking to replace him as governor next year, Democrats and Republicans alike, along with Mayor Daniel Lurie of San Francisco, a moderate Democrat, and a wealthy heir to the Levi Strauss fortune. Brian Brokaw, a Democratic strategist, and Newsom advisor working on the campaign, said that with Mr. Sanders coming to California this week to promote the wealth tax, it was important to explain that well-known California Democrats have taken a look at this proposal and realize how dangerous it is. The opposition campaign has been funded so far by Ron Conway, a tech investor, and Daniel Tierney, an investor in AI and climate solutions, with more donations expected to be disclosed in the next several days. The crypto-related opposition drive, an opposition campaign committee with ties to the crypto industry called Golden State Promise, officially formed on Friday. It was expected to report this week $10 million in donations, including $5 million from Chris Larsen, a founder of the cryptocurrency company Ripple. The group has been trying to raise money with a pitch deck that sheds light on some of its strategy. Messaging is everything, the deck says. Billionaires cannot be the focus or face of an opposition campaign. Instead, it says the campaign must tailor messages for voters across different demographics, emphasizing that the wealth tax will hurt working people, will cause businesses to flee the state, or is being pushed by special interests. The sales pitch prominently features Fair Shake, the crypto industry super PAC that spent more than $100 million in 2024 to help elect congressional candidates who backed cryptocurrency. Golden State Promise also has Democratic ties. Its team includes pollster Ben Tolchin, who was a strategist on Mr. Sanders' presidential campaign, and Roger Salazar, a longtime Democratic consultant. Mr. Salazar said the group plans to run ads that will make sure Californians know what's truly at stake for the economy and the workforce. Suzanne Jimenez, chief of staff for the Healthcare Workers Union, criticized such efforts. It's unfortunate that instead of trying to figure out how to make sure that we don't see a healthcare collapse in the state, wealthy individuals and their friends choose to go this route, she said. Another effort taking shape this week is less direct. It's supporting 3 competing initiatives that could prevent the wealth tax from qualifying or nullify the tax if it reaches the ballot. In the near term, the presence of 3 more petitions increases the cost for all initiative campaigns, potentially making it harder for other measures to get enough signatures. Backers of 2 of the new initiatives are paying $12 per signature, more than almost every other campaign now circulating a petition, according to data compiled by the Bicker, Castillo, Fairbanks, and Spitz public affairs firm, a longtime ballot measure consultant not involved in the new measures. The billionaire tax campaign is paying $10 per signature, double the amount it was paying earlier this month. In California, campaigns that pay enough money can often qualify their initiatives because signature gatherers prioritize the highest-paying petition efforts. Rising rates could force the Healthcare Workers Union to run out of money or prevent it from getting enough signatures on time. The new measures are funded by Building a Better California, a PAC supported by Sergey Brin, a founder of Google, and several other tech billionaires who have poured $35 million into it. Supporters of 2 of the measures began collecting signatures over the weekend, and backers of the third one are expected to hit the streets on Tuesday. If the wealth tax qualifies for the November ballot, and some or all of the new measures also get enough signatures, the battle is likely to move to the fall campaign season. Under California law, if voters approve 2 ballot measures that contradict each other, only the one that receives more votes takes effect. Each of the new countermeasures contains provisions that conflict with aspects of the billionaire tax. One of them would prohibit new taxes on personal property and financial assets like stocks, pensions, and retirement accounts. The other 2 contain provisions that could invalidate the wealth tax. One is an auditing measure that would also prohibit the state from imposing taxes that are excluded from a long-standing state spending limit. The other says the state could not impose new taxes that do not follow California's school funding formula. Abby Lunardi, a spokeswoman for Mr. Brin's PAC, said the group was not motivated by political gamesmanship, and was focused on supporting policies that improve affordability and quality of life in California. We believe in public investment, but we also think it's critical there's more transparency and oversight of how state funds are spent, she said. Outside of a Safeway grocery store in Sacramento on Monday, shoppers stopped to sign petitions on a clipboard thick with 14 proposed ballot measures. Some were eager to sign all of them. Others walked past the petitioner. Matt Nielsen, age 45, took time to review each petition in the stack. He decided he did not want to sign the new measure prohibiting new taxes on assets. He flipped through a few more until he got to the billionaire tax and said he was happy to sign his name. They have the means to do it, he said, and the services that we all use need more funding. We need that to come from somewhere. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And a reminder, our brand new app is available. Download it. It's free in your app store and enjoy. Great, simple operation, too. Next article, a Rio Carnival party that goes on and on. The Boy Tolo, one of the city's most iconic street parties, has come to represent the glittery, gritty grassroots celebration, far from the glamour of the official parades. The square started filling well before dawn. Some revelers arrived clad in neon fishnets and doused in glitter. Others who had been at parties elsewhere napped on a grassy patch. The musicians came last, lugging drums and trumpets. It was Sunday morning during Carnival in Rio de Janeiro, and the square in the city's historic center was the setting for the start of a kind of roving marathon block party known as the Boy Tolo. The Boy Tolo has no set time, script, or route. A swell of thousands of euphoric revelers marching through the city at a frantic pace. Those who missed the start spend the day trying to catch up, firing off messages in group chats. Where is the Boy Tolo? Keeping pace is grueling. Along the way, you start wondering, should I give up? I'm going to give up, said Lucas Fagundes, age 35. It's like the ultimate test of your stamina. Few parties represent the fervor and chaos of Rio's street carnival scene better than the Boy Tolo. Far from the glamour of official carnival parades, it has come to embody the gritty, informal celebrations that take over the streets. At 6:50 a.m. on Sunday, the crowd at the square had grown to a few hundred people, clad in bejeweled cowboy hats and shimmering bikinis. The musicians erupted in an improvised symphony of brass drums and percussion instruments. A giant human chain formed around the band, and everyone set off through the narrow streets, paralyzing traffic. As they passed a tram stop, a shiny Medusa blew soap bubbles towards commuters. Stilt walkers passed a bus stuck in the sea of people. One of the few rules of the celebration is to keep moving. Whenever anyone stopped for an impassioned kiss, the crowd erupted, "Kiss and walk, kiss and walk." The direction is not always clear. We decide the route in the moment, said Luis Alameda, age 62, one of the party's founders. The Boy Tolo started by chance 2 decades ago when a group of people arrived at a public square during Carnival Sunday, ready to party but found no party, apparently misled by a newspaper announcement. Frustrated, they decided to improvise. A beer vendor nearby had a tambourine. Someone called a friend with a drum. A lone trumpeter showed up, joining the group. Then a reveler picked up a piece of cardboard and in lipstick scribbled Boy Tolo, or Foolish Bull, for their falling for the faulty announcement. The tradition stuck, and it now draws tens of thousands of people each year. Boy Tolo only exists because people want it to exist, Mr. Alameda said. Carnival is made on the streets. It's made by the people. This year's party eventually spilled into a sprawling park where costumed spectators hung off tree branches and squeezed under an overpass as hundreds of people cheered above. To many Caracas, as people from Rio are known, Carnival is often akin to an extreme sport that requires grit and endurance. In recent years, growing numbers of visitors and searing temperatures have made it harder for even the most resilient to party hard. To try to beat the heat, Boitolo set out earlier than usual this year. Still, as temperatures topped 90, people fanned themselves and doused each other with water. By 11 a.m., the sun was scorching. A stilt worker in a sequined bikini crumpled to the ground. "I'm fine, my blood pressure just dropped," she said, as she got up and started twerking again. Oh, I'd worry about the blood pressure. The procession headed toward a pair of tunnels leading to Rio's beachfront. Most participants were drenched in sweat, their makeup melting. But this is what they had been waiting for, the highlight of the Boitolo. The beat quickened, echoing through the tunnel. The crowd burst into euphoric jubilation. "It's magical," said Parola Mendoca, 26. "It's this incredible feeling of ecstasy." On the other end, the party kept moving along the beachfront. By 4:30 p.m., the participants reached the end of the boardwalk, but they weren't ready to stop, so they turned around and headed back toward the tunnel. After a 12-hour march through the city, a few hundred partygoers were still not ready to quit. With the light fading, they made their way back toward the city center where it all started. As they passed a stretch of beach, they rushed onto the sand. A man in a cowboy hat hooked his snare drum on the crossbar of a goalpost. The crowd closed in as the musicians started playing a party anthem with lyrics the crowd could relate to. "I'm not going home, I'm not going home," the revelers belted out, jumping up and down in the sand. Exhausted, Yasmin Santiago, 22, leaned on the goalpost. She had joined a few hours earlier, not knowing what it was, but eager to party. "This is Boitolo? No way," Ms. Santiago said when she found out, her face lighting up. Turning to her friend, she called out, "Girl, did you hear that? We found Boitolo. We've been looking for it for ages." Next from the New York Times, Trump sought vast budget cuts. Congress granted few. In a series of deals over the past 3 months, lawmakers rejected some of the president's most aggressive attempts to whittle down the government. Shortly after returning to office, President Trump embarked on an aggressive campaign to pare back the core functions of the federal government, unveiling a budget that proposed some of the steepest spending reductions in U.S. history. Nearly 1 year later, Congress has rejected much of that vision. In a little-noticed development, lawmakers have systematically brushed off many of Mr. Trump's most severe cuts for his fiscal year, leaving intact a vast set of federal education, health, housing, and research programs that the White House had tried to slash or eliminate. For Mr. Trump, the result is a set of annual government expenses that do not appear radically different on paper compared with what he inherited in January of 2025. Overall, Congress is on track to approve more than $1.6 trillion in discretionary spending for 2026, amounting to little change from the previous fiscal year, according to a preliminary analysis of federal budget records by the Penn-Wharton Budget Model, a nonpartisan research organization. The finer details are apparent in the complicated legislation that Congress enacted between November and February, targeting primarily domestic programs. Mr. Trump had originally recommended about $163 billion in deep spending cuts, but lawmakers often did not abide, and in the end, some of the funding that the president had tried to erase, including for medical research, college aid, and benefits for poor people, instead changed only slightly, the data showed. Mr. Trump still prevailed in other ways, most notably in his efforts to scale back the size and reach of government by ousting thousands of federal workers. Still, the outcome on Capitol Hill underscores the complex and fraught politics of austerity, where the president sees evidence of spending that is woke, weaponized, or wasteful. His critics in both parties see money that is essential to their communities and the broader economy. At times, the difficult dynamic has put the White House at odds with some congressional Republicans, many of whom are up for re-election this November. That has only reinforced Mr. Trump's desire to circumvent lawmakers altogether, using a series of contested and potentially illegal maneuvers to revoke billions in congressionally approved spending that the president disfavors. Kent Smetters, the faculty director of the Penn-Wharton budget model, said that for now, Congress has basically rejected everything that Mr. Trump had sought. By law, the White House must send Congress a budget by the first Monday in February, a deadline that presidents from both parties have regularly missed without consequence. The administration is expected to release its latest blueprint for the 2027 fiscal year as soon as next month. Mr. Smetters added that the result this year illustrated a well-worn truth that presidential budgets are aspirational in nature and that in the fight to trim spending, there are always strong vested interests for keeping federal funds intact. To come to the preliminary budget estimates, the New York Times analyzed spending across the 11 appropriation bills adopted by Congress, primarily using early data furnished by Democrats on the Senate Appropriations Committee and a set of outside groups, including Penn-Wharton. A final 12th bill covering Homeland Security has not yet passed. Top Republican appropriators did not respond to requests for comment. The analysis focused primarily on domestic spending, not defense, which Trump has increased considerably in his first year back in office. He secured some of that military funding as part of his sprawling tax legislation, which was paid for in part by cutting back benefits and programs like Medicaid and food stamps. In effect, the changes broke with a long-running tradition in Washington to treat defense and domestic spending with parity, a development that the administration sees as one of its signature victories. The White House, nonetheless, maintains that it has meaningfully changed the nation's fiscal trajectory during Mr. Trump's second term. The administration has already moved to shutter entire agencies and revoke billions in spending previously authorized by Congress. That includes rescinding about $14 billion that lawmakers adopted for foreign aid and public broadcasting last year. Some of the cuts, including federal support for the organization that funds NPR, were sustained by Congress in recent months, which helped to lower the overall amount spent by the government in 2026, according to officials at the White House Budget Office, who spoke on the condition of anonymity to describe their thinking. The appropriations bills, reconciliation, rescissions, all the different tools we are using, it's the end of futility, Russell T. Voigt, the director of the Budget Office, said in a statement, referring to the legislative process that allowed Mr. Trump to enact his tax legislation and repeal past spending. Mark Goldwein, the senior vice president at the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget, said that the president's actions in his first year in office carried mixed budgetary implications. On one hand, he said the Trump administration did not get a big nominal cut in spending in Congress for the 2026 fiscal year, which ends on September 30th. But Mr. Goldwein, whose group supports deficit reduction, said the White House did manage to ward off perennial spending increases for domestic programs, which still amounted to a quote-unquote big victory. Last spring, for example, Mr. Trump took his first steps to try to dismantle the Education Department, where he and his aides froze funds and either fired or reassigned staff members without congressional approval. Yet, Democrats and Republicans adopted a funding deal in late January that provisioned $79 billion for the agency, a slight increase from 2025, the data showed. They also rejected some of the president's ideas, including his attempt to sharply reduce funding for Pell Grants, which aid low-income college students. At the White House, officials said they still believe that they can proceed with their attempts to dissolve the department and relocate its staff this year, arguing that the new funding legislation did not explicitly prevent them from doing so. Lawmakers, similarly, rejected steep cuts proposed by Mr. Trump for agencies including the Departments of Commerce, Labor, Health and Human Services, which saw only slight changes to their overall annual budgets, the records show. and they jettisoned some of Mr. Trump's most significant attempts to whittle down anti-poverty programs, particularly federal housing assistance. The president initially proposed overhauling and halving the funding for a stable of benefits that includes housing vouchers, which serve about 2.4 million low-income households, but Congress did not weigh his proposed restructuring. Instead, lawmakers preserved vouchers and increased overall funding at the Department of Housing and Urban Development to about $84 billion, after accounting for fees and other receipts, according to Senate data and an analysis this month by the National Low-Income Housing Coalition, which advocates for the money. James C. Capretti, a senior fellow at the right-leaning American Enterprise Institute, said the choices generally reflected a disconnect between the president's political agenda and the typical bipartisan process on the Hill that surrounds the appropriation process. The tension became apparent as Mr. Trump chased sharp reductions in federal research across the government this fiscal year. He trained his sights on the National Institute of Health, NASA, and a set of other related agencies and programs whose research budgets he hoped to cut by about a combined $40 billion, according to the American Association for the Advancement of Science, which supports federal science funding. But lawmakers came to reject Mr. Trump's science cuts in the agreements enacted through February, essentially leaving overall funding flat or facing just slight decreases, according to the association. Even for an agency like the National Science Foundation, a frequent target of Mr. Trump, the outcome was a major change. The president aimed to cut its research funds by more than half, but Congress only chose to shave off nearly 4% of its total budget. Alessandra Zimmerman, a top budget analyst at the association, said the consequences would have been staggering if Mr. Trump had prevailed, undermining research into cancer cures and other advancements. But she said that Democrats and Republicans alike had united in public concern about the implications for their communities. Science is a core component of most of the American economy now, she said. Some Republican leaders had even engaged in rare open criticism of the White House when it unilaterally tried to hold up billions in research grants last year before Congress could consider such cuts. In a fit pattern of similar interventions by Mr. Trump, which prompted Congress to impose a set of new handcuffs on the White House in its recent spending deals, the restrictions aimed to make it harder for the president to interrupt funds that lawmakers have appropriated. Senator Patty Murray of Washington, who leads Democrats on the Chamber's Appropriations Committee, described it as an attempt to reassert authorities afforded to Congress by the Constitution. This president hasn't followed the laws and norms of the past in any way, so my expectation is he will try to do the same, added Ms. Murray, noting she had tried and failed to secure stricter limits on the president's spending powers. Many of Trump's actions targeted a wide array of funds into the billions of dollars, remain the subject of hundreds of unresolved lawsuits, and several recent federal investigations have found evidence of illegal actions. But Mr. Trump has remained undeterred, and his aides have signaled that they intend to continue to try and revoke spending that it opposes with or without Congress. In its latest move, the administration announced this month that it would cut about $600 million in health-related grants to 4 Democratic-led states, continuing a pattern in which the White House has weaponized the budget, chiefly against the president's political rivals. Last week, a federal judge temporarily blocked the administration from proceeding. White House officials have also telegraphed that they intend to reprise their push for steep spending reductions in the budget due this spring. In doing so, Mr. Trump has publicly promised to seek another substantial increase in military spending, with the goal of securing $1.5 trillion in the 2027 fiscal year. Jessica Rydell, a budget and tax fellow at the Brookings Institution, said the White House entered that new fight in a more experienced way, with another year under its belt to broaden its analysis of the federal budget and where to cut. But Ms. Rydell said she did not expect the political dynamics to change considerably, setting up what may be another round of fierce bickering that could once again risk a prolonged shutdown. I'm still not sure they're going to have a receptive audience on the Hill, she said. Members are extremely nervous about re-election, and there is not a political environment to take on major spending cuts, especially those defended with culture war rhetoric. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the February 18th issue of the New York Times. Your reader has been Chuck Stevens. Thank you for listening.